I came across some statistics this morning that I don't know if this will surprise you or not. It's pretty simple. It's from the Institute on Substance Use Disorders, and it says 2/3 of U.S. adults say either they or a family member have been addicted to alcohol or drugs, experienced homelessness due to addiction, or experienced a drug overdose leading to an ER visit, hospitalization, or death.
That is terrifying.
2/3.
Yeah.
And it's said to me, I've always wondered why we have such a large listening and viewing audience, and that's sort of an explanation because it's like 2/3 of the entire country has had that kind of experience.
So much.
It's huge.
It is huge, but it doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise you.
No.
Wow.
And I think part of the reason why it doesn't surprise me is because getting to know therapists and people who are working in recovery, a lot of those people either are in recovery themselves or they have loved ones, which is why they have entered the field.
Could be.
It's a good point. Yeah.
I guess. I guess all that makes sense, but I still find those figures somewhat shocking.
Yeah.
We want to welcome you to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Randall Carlisle. My co-host is Nicole Slack, and our guest is Kenny Bell. And so I guess we're talking about a topic of importance to 2/3 of everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. And we were talking about you earlier, and it certainly applies to you, right? It applies to me because for as far back as I can find, everybody on the paternal side of my family was an alcoholic. So I was well aware of it. I just decided to drink anyway. So was why. So tell us do you mind sharing the background of your family that would certainly indicate that this is true?
Absolutely. So I was born to both parents being addicts.
You were born to a mother, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So both of my parents were addicts. I was actually born addicted to cocaine and heroin.
Really?
They thought I had spinal meningitis because they didn't know as much back then about babies being born addicted and detoxing. Right. And so I went through multiple spinal taps to find that it was not spinal meningitis. And then through the years, I was raised by my dad. My mom had left the scene.
Let's go back to your birth first. I mean, because back then, I don't know how many years ago it was, but because I'm not even going to guess. So did they detox babies then, or did you just have to gut it out and just be sick?
Gut it out and just be sick. They had no idea why I was so sick.
Well,
yeah.
Okay, so go ahead with
So over the years, my mom had left the picture. My dad was super abusive. And my dad and my brothers were all in gangs of some kind or another, right? And so I was raised with this unspoken, like, you don't speak to cops. I knew to protect my dad and my brothers any way I could, because if I didn't, I would lose them. Over the years, eventually the state intervened and they took me from my biological father. I spent some time in state's custody as a foster child and got to experience the foster world. And then eventually was adopted to a super religious family and have been able to change my life from there. And then for whatever reason, felt like I needed to have unanswered questions answered, or what it was, I don't know. But I went and I found my dad and my brothers after I hit adulthood.
Still in gangs, still doing
the same thing, in and out of prison. In fact, at this point, both of my brothers were in federal prison and had been for over 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I wasn't using, but of course I moved from Arizona to here to be around my family. And I don't know if it was just that I needed the acceptance or the love, or if it tied into abandonment issues that I was having, or what it was, but I moved out here and was around my dad. And I was sober, but I was around everybody that was using, everybody that was breaking the law. So I was living the lifestyle. I just hadn't started using yet. And had made some poor choices got in trouble myself. At this point, my kids' dad was still in Arizona. And I asked him to take the kids because I didn't know if I was going to get locked up. And if I did get locked up, what was going to happen to my kids? And that led to an unfortunate 10-year separation of me and my kids. And
Boy or girl?
I have a daughter and 2 boys.
Okay.
Yeah. And then over the years, kind of dealt with it partially, right? Eventually, my dad died. And that was like the ultimate. And in the process of the poor decisions I was making, I alienated my adopted family from me. And so now I'm left with nobody. And so I really got to a point where I was like, well, screw it. You know what I mean? If what's the point? I don't have my kids. I don't have purpose. I don't have my dad. I'm by myself. And so I started using drugs, dealing drugs. And boy, was that the wrong choice to make.
Your adoptive family cut off contact with you because you were hanging around your dad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're very religious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you'd given your kids to the biological father.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a recipe for disaster.
It was.
How did that? So you said you were using and dealing, and
Yeah.
what kind of drugs?
Pretty much anything and everything I could get my hands on.
Uppers, downers, what?
So in the beginning, it was a lot of stimulants, cocaine, meth.
Okay.
And then I had been introduced to heroin, started to really enjoy the heroin, and then the designer drugs like bath salt came out. And that was a whole nother ballgame. But really, I found myself in a position where my intent was never to take my own life, but had I used too much and my life ended, I would not have been disappointed. I would have been okay with that. And I think it was just from the lack of connection. It didn't have any true connection with anybody. I felt alone. I felt like the world was a miserable place to be in. And so why not? I did a lot of time in jail, in and out. I'd get out on probation, never check in. Or when I would check in, I would be high and I would have to try to BS the PO, like, why am I high? You know what I mean? I'm not high. Why do you think I'm high? And
well, let me see. I think it's because you did drugs.
Yeah.
Smart PO there.
Yeah. And
right.
so over time, I don't know what changed or what happened, but I found myself in a jail cell and I thought, God, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is exhausting. I can't do this. And my daughter at this point was mid-teens. And I was thinking, God, she's old enough at this point with social media to find me. And what am I going to do if she finds me? Am I willing to introduce her to the same life my dad did for me? Absolutely not. And so at that point, something changed. And this is back when Mark Augustine still was the go-to person at the Salt Lake County Jail if you wanted treatment. And so I reached out to him and I was like, I don't have a stable place to go. I don't know what I'm doing. And he was like, okay, let's get you into treatment. And it took a minute, but he got me into treatment. And even early on in treatment, even though I asked for it, I still was super ambivalent, right? Like, I could still deal drugs and be sober and make money, right? Like, I don't know what I was thinking. But the
switch hadn't clicked the whole way.
Yeah.
It was like a dimmer switch.
Yeah.
That's a good one put.
So I'm in CATS, and I'm trying to figure out how I can still have one foot in both worlds.
CATS, we should explain because we have a lot of people watching around the world and around the country, is a program within the Salt Lake County Jail that is run by Odyssey House. Mm-hmm. And it's basically you're separated from the rest of the jail population, and you're in a pod with other people who are in the CATS program. And I'd say it's basically, they're teaching you the same stuff that you would do in a residential program outside of jail, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's the background. So you're in CATS, but you're still...
But I'm still super ambivalent and like one foot in, one foot out, trying to figure out what that's going to look like. And somewhere the seed got planted while I was there and it started growing. And by the time I had been released and gone into a second residential, it just became less and less appealing. like watching people use treatment as a revolving door. I was like, well, if I didn't want to be in and out of jail as a revolving door, why would I want to do it with treatment? Because this is clearly what's going to happen. And so something that just changed. And when I did treatment, sober living vouchers were still super, super new. And so I didn't get a sober living voucher. I didn't get assistance with sober living, and really still didn't have anywhere stable to go.
You
after
complete a
treatment.
residential program, but nowhere to go.
Yeah. And so I found myself back in a drug house. However, this time I tried something different that I hadn't tried before. And when I went to check in with my PO, I just explained to him, like, I'm in a bad situation, but I'm staying sober. And I've got a job and I'm doing the things. And I'm trying to save the money. And he worked with me. He was willing to work with me because I was honest with him. And so over the time, I was able to get the money together and get my life put together. And lo and behold, I ended up with 2 out of 3 of my kids back.
Really?
Yeah. The youngest one is still with dad, but I have 2 of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how long have you been sober?
So I never remembered, like, mark the calendar for my
Right.
sober date, right? So I don't have a sober date, but I can tell you that I've been clean roughly 6 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where to go?
And I've worked for Odyssey for 5 of it.
So you finally got sober, and you started. Why did you want to work at Odyssey?
So early on in recovery, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was kind of bouncing around and was still struggling with the finding purpose. And an old supervisor, well, an old employee of Odyssey had mentioned, why don't you come work for us? And so I was like, I don't know, like, I don't know if I'm the one. And she's like, just come give it a try. And so I did, and I fell in love with it. And I think the biggest piece for me is I get to be that little beacon of hope, right? So I work in the admissions department, and I see a lot of people from my own addiction come through those doors, and I hear a lot, oh, we never thought you would change. We thought you would always be in the addiction. And so to let people see that I was able to do it, I hope that they have faith that they can do it too.
And you still enjoy the job?
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, if saying on tape that you don't enjoy the job would not be a very wise move.
Well, if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't have stuck around for so long.
Yeah.
And she does it so gracefully. She handles all the angry clients, the ones that I feel like I'm the designated bearer of bad news, and then she's the buffer after.
Oh, thank you.
She just handles them so well and helps them out and sees this she has this compassion where mine might end.
So thank you. I appreciate that, because I don't always feel that way. Some days I feel, because it's admissions is where there's a lot of motivational interviewing taking place, right, with the clients, and they're super ambivalent. And some of them are only there because they're court ordered.
Right.
They don't have any intention of changing at that point in time in their life. And so it's challenging in the sense of they don't really want to be there. And you find that they have never had boundaries set with them before. And so when we're setting boundaries at admissions, it's uncomfortable for them and they don't like it.
I'll bet. I've seen that a lot of the time. I actually, several years ago, I actually drove the van from the jail to admissions a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And to hear I found it interesting to hear the people talking in the van. It's first of all, they compare their criminal records, and it's like, I'm badder than you're bad, that kind of stuff. And then as you're driving, depending on the route from the county jail town to downtown, it's like, oh, this happened here and that happened there, and I was busted here. And and some have been through Odyssey a bunch of times or other treatment programs, and others it's their first time, and they give each other. And it was fun listening, because the guys who had been through Odyssey would say, you can do this. You got to just fake this out. You got to do this and that kind of stuff. And so there is. It would be interesting to be in admissions, because I was going to ask you to generalize what the attitude is in admissions, but it must be different with each person.
It really is. You've got some people that are coming in there and they're ready. They want this, and there's nothing going to be a barrier with them getting in treatment. And then you've got others that they really don't want to be there, and they're calling their POs and begging and pleading to be able to go to a different treatment center or do outpatient versus residential. And I think that people coming from incarceration don't realize when the judge signed off for us to come pick them up, that's an unspoken court order. Even though the judge wasn't standing there saying, this is my order, this is my expectation, it is. And so I'm trying to have that conversation with them of like, we've got to sign releases of information for your courts so that we can communicate and hopefully, with your help, keep you in good standings with the courts, right? And I'm not court ordered here. Well, did the judge let us come pick you up?
Yeah.
Then you're court ordered. and so it's kind of a shock for them too. But ultimately, I feel like once they've spent good 5-7 days in the treatment center in one of the houses, they soften up a little bit. They're like, okay, I can do this. I can get into the groove. But sometimes they're super resistant.
Well, I think it would be scary just walking in. I mean, we have a nice admissions office and everything, and people are treated well, but it's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, when I went to my first program, it was, I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't, and how do you, I mean, you can tell people, and I've been in there many times in that front office, and people are nervous. How do you allay their nervousness or fears?
I think it really starts with just a friendly hello and introduce yourself. And that opens a whole conversation of like, let me just be realistic with you. When you get there, it's going to feel overwhelming. It's going to feel like chaos. It's going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's okay to be feeling uncomfortable or uncertain or having anxiety. That's normal. But being realistic with them and just like, this is what you can expect. Your first 24, 48, 72 hours, you'll have a buddy that's assigned to you. That's your go-to person. They'll kind of help walk you through the different processes of getting your needs met. And something that we've started doing at admissions is to help alleviate some of that is those that are coming in with nothing. We try to make sure that they have some clean clothes going in, because how awkward is it to walk into a place that you're not familiar with, you don't know what's happening, and be like, I just came from incarceration and my clothes have been in a locker for who knows how long.
And I've walked in with a white garbage bag.
Yeah.
I think right when they come in, we just treat them like people.
Yeah.
Instead of inmates.
Yeah.
And making sure that we're like having conversations with them and not telling them things. Yeah. Like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. Like, are you doing okay? Do you need anything? And we're having conversations with them and they're not being talked at.
Yeah.
And so I think that really opens them up if they don't bail out of the van right when they get to admissions.
Yeah, I had that happen several times. I'd say, where are you going? They'd say, I'm out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it's super unfortunate because when that happens, we've made a commitment when we're picking them up, right, that we're going to communicate with the courts if there's any changes. And so we have to make those hard phone calls and say, hey, your parolee or whoever has decided that they don't want to be here. And then we go right back into the revolving door of a warrant gets issued and they get picked up. And
I guess they figure that they'll have just a brief respite out on the streets, and they know that they'll end up back in jail, but you can use for a week or two until you get busted.
A lot of them come back to admissions within a couple of days, and they're like, they're either begging to come in because they're terrified of their PO, or they'll come back months later and they're like, the marshals found me in like 2 hours. And I'm like, that's wild.
Yeah.
You can't run.
Yeah. Catches up to you eventually.
How does it work for you working with people like that? My assessment working at Odyssey House is it helps keep me sober, because every day you're working with people who are in sobriety.
So I feel like it's very humbling. It's a great reminder of where I came from, and in the most pleasant way ever, that I don't want to go back to that, right? And so it's a reminder. But to be honest with you, I don't know that I would be sober today if I wasn't working for Odyssey. I've had a lot of trying situations that have happened in my life. I've run into people from my past who are offering to put me to work. And
I got a job for you.
And it's great to know that I still have the accountability piece, right? Even though I'm a staff member, I'm still held to the highest standards.
Sure.
And so even if the people around me won't hold me accountable in my personal life, Odyssey will. And so I'll always have that accountability piece. And I think that that's been super helpful in my sobriety.
So many people I talk to, and I bring this up a lot, they'll say, "You've got a bunch of recovering addicts working in your residential houses and admissions.
Yeah.
Nicole doing the podcast, you
Yeah.
doing the podcast, And my point is, who better to deal with somebody coming in for help in terms of understanding, being able to call out their bullshit,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's like you just said, you run into somebody who you may have known in your past life, and it's like, gee, she could do it.
Yeah. If she can do it, I can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
And I've said, well, I don't know if you're more hardcore than other people were.
I don't think it's necessarily about being hardcore. I think it really takes being willing to want something different and being willing to do the hard work, because it's not easy. You get to face emotions that you haven't faced in a long time. You get to face realities that you've stuffed away, and you have to really look inside. And so those that it's a revolving door, the treatment is, you have to ask, like, what is it that you didn't work on? And let's work on that, because clearly you're missing something.
Right.
And maybe it's just that they don't want to work on it. They don't want to look inward, but really it takes looking inward.
I think that's one reason why, obviously we have a pretty structured setup and there's a lot of rules, but I think one of the biggest reasons why people say they don't like Odyssey is because you're trying to bore into their soul and find out why they were trying to numb themselves. And that's the hardest thing for people to talk about. The rules, who'd we talk to? Teresa, she goes out to the jail and they say, Odyssey's too hard. And she'll say, well, don't you think jail's sort of hard? You don't have a phone. You have to get up at you have to do all this stuff. And I don't think it's the rules so much in Odyssey as the fact that we're trying to get into the real core reason why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, you have to step into uncomfortability for sure. And if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, you're not going to grow.
Go ahead. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think the hardest part of Odyssey is accountability. Holding others accountable is like coming from jail, coming from prison, teaching them that holding others accountable helps you hold yourself accountable.
Yeah.
Is the most difficult piece and the biggest part of like everyone's argument with me anyway on why Odyssey's hard.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't want to be a snitch. And I'm like, okay, let's have the snitch conversation.
Yeah, let's
it's not
challenge that thought.
snitching, it's accountability. And if you're not holding them accountable, how would you hold yourself accountable? And so I find that to be the toughest piece for conversations I've had.
I hear that too. That and smoking, but but that's a given, I guess.
Well, they weren't smoking in jail.
Well, that's another good point.
But I also get that freedom brings cravings that you didn't have in jail. I've been there. When you're in jail, you can't have it. There's no option to have it. It's not there. And so you almost forget it exists. And then all of a sudden you're free and you're like, oh, cigarette smoke, I can smell it. I want it.
So you're reunified now with 2 of your 3 kids. Mm-hmm. How's that going?
It's a work in progress. So there was not a reunification period when I got my kids back. It was literally, they just were there one day.
Wow.
And I got my daughter first. And for her, it was because she had turned 18. And so she came to live with me. And I didn't know what to expect. She didn't know what to expect. And so we both kind of danced around and walked on eggshells at first. And then we had our big first blow up fight. And I think that that's where we started making progress. And we got to learn like who she is and who I am and how can we make this work, right? And then about a year into that, my son got introduced into the home. And which is super cool. He came to live with me the week of the camping trip for Odyssey. And Cheryl was super cool about the whole thing and let me bring him camping
No
with
kidding.
the clients for a week. Yeah.
Wow.
And so he got to really like dive in and have a whole week with me and get to see what I do and where I came from. And that was super helpful. However, it still brings its challenges. The kids still have a hard time when I have to say no or when I have to be the bad guy and parent because they're not used to that from me.
You talk about your screw-ups in the past.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I try to be careful and mindful of how I talk about them because I don't want to plant ideas in my kids' head to go do
Don't want to
things.
glamorize the life.
Yeah. But I still want them to know, like, things come up. And I'm like, well, I can't rent. My criminal record doesn't allow for me to rent. And so I've worked really hard to buy my home. And I've tried to explain to my kids, like, you guys have the luxury of being able to rent. Don't screw it up. This is what drug addiction and criminal life has done for me. Please learn from my mistakes. Although we all know that that's not a reality. But it would be nice.
My mother said, if you keep drinking because alcoholism's in your DNA, you'll become an alcoholic. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, I won't. So we don't listen to our parents when they say stuff like that.
Yep, the denial. How would they know? They don't know. They grew up in a
know.
whole different time. They don't
An
know anything.
alcoholic is that dude down on the street corner who looks like a bum and is drinking out of a brown paper bag. I'm
Yeah.
not that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been challenging, but it's been super rewarding.
People are lucky to have you at our admissions department.
Thank you.
It's just you're understand. Yeah, I wish people would understand. Outsiders would understand why it's so crucial to have people in recovery working for us,
Yeah.
especially in a place like admissions.
And to understand that, just like me, it doesn't matter how much I loved my kids. That wasn't going to be the reason I changed. It might have been the initial motivation,
Right.
but eventually it had to turn inward, right? And I hear a lot from people coming in seeking information to get their loved ones into treatment. I hear a lot that why can't they stop? They say that they love me. Well, it doesn't work that way. It just, the human body and mind is
It's
Way more complex.
It's a disease.
Yeah.
It's a disease of the brain.
Yeah.
And they're not making sense right now.
No.
And there's 1 million people who have let their kids go, acting as though it's not that the drug is more important than the kids. Yeah. And at the time, it seems like it is.
Yeah. And to be real, in the moment, I would never say that I loved drugs more than my children because that would never be true. But in the moment, I wasn't thinking about the long-term effects of my kids, right? I was thinking about the instant gratification of the feeling that I wanted and it was all about me in the moment.
That was well put. We are out of time. Thank you, Kenny Bell, for being here. Good suggestion on your part, Nicole.
Thank you for having me.
If I had to go back to a program, I'd want to run into you to get into that program. So
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you have a good day, and I thank you for sharing some honest thoughts about everything, and I hope it helps somebody who's watching.
Yep. Amen.
So thank you for watching or listening to another edition of Odyssey House Journals.